Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Tuesday Coffee Talk with Tamela Spicer. We know that this is a very important topic to many of you as you learn to shift and navigate a new environment around fundraising. I will not spend too much time because we really do try to keep these to 30 minutes out of respect for everyone's time. Many of you had the opportunity to meet Tamela when she came to do an actual in-person training for us on grant writing, and we are thrilled to have Tamela as a great resource for us. And so I'm not going to spend too much more time introducing you. I'm going to turn this over actually to Ashley Jordan, and Ashley and Tamela are going to run the show today. So if you aren't already, please mute. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat feature and we will read those throughout the opportunity. I know that this is going to be much more interactive and casual. So enjoy your cup of coffee and be ready to ask questions. And Ashley, I'll go ahead and turn it to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Like Jody said, Tamela is here with us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to her. Like Jody said, if you guys have any questions, make sure and pop those into the chat and I will help get those questions over to Tamela. If you have a question that you prefer to ask out loud, please send me a private message and we'll get you unmuted so you can ask that. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tamela.
Good morning. So glad to be with all of you. So here's my confession. Last week I had prepared a little PowerPoint and then I had a conversation with Ashley yesterday. And after that conversation, I said, you know, I'll just share a couple of points and we'll just have a conversation. Because I know that all of you are dealing with very different issues when it comes to fund development right now. And I know that for some of you, this might be like, yep, no problem, same old, same old. For some of you, this might be a little scary thinking about what do we actually do? The question I get asked a lot right now is it okay to fundraise? And my answer is always yes and no. So, and yes, because when I think about fundraising versus fund development, and if you were at the grant writing workshop, you might remember I talked about this. So fundraising is very transactional. This is not the time to be transactional. This is the time to be relational. Good fund development is relational. So I really am encouraging people to press into those relationships that you have. Talk to the people that love your organization, that know you, that are close to you. And let them know what's going on. Be honest, be transparent. Say, here's what we are dealing with. Here's how we've shifted our programming, or maybe here's why we're not doing any programming right now, because it's also an important conversation to have. But really press into those relationships and think about how you tell the story of your organization. So when we press into relationships and we tell good stories, part of that is listening well. And if we listen, our donors will let us know when is the right time to ask. That's always been true of fund development work, and it remains true in the midst of the COVID crisis. So it's important to think about what's the story that you're telling? How are you contextualizing your work for your donors in the midst of this? How are you casting a vision for the future? We're eventually all gonna, I've sort of stopped saying we're gonna return back to work because most of us are still working. I'm trying to talk about we're eventually gonna re-enter, right? We're gonna open up the economy. We're going to re-enter sort of the quote unquote norm. And then we're going to have to think about how do we recover. So as you go through those different stages, it's going to be important to tell those different stories to your donors, people that are close to you already. This probably is not the best time to go out and seek new donors. And I say probably because there are a few exceptions to that. But by and large, this isn't a great time to go out and seek new donors. This is a great time to press into the relationships you already have. And the other sort of two things that I want to mention before we open it up for questions is as you think about next steps, because we're all going to go back to this reentry and recovery, we're going to have to figure out what do we do next? What does the world look like when we open up our offices? What does the world look like as we begin to recover in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And yes, you should be thinking that far out. You should be doing some scenario planning that far out. Probably 24 months to 3 years is ideal. But really think about how we fit in the new paradigm. If we're providing direct service as an organization, that's a fairly easy way to demonstrate your fit. Housing, food, we know those are 2 key issues right now. We know as the economy tries to adjust to this new norm, there are going to probably be more people in need. By all predictions, that's what we're looking at. So those emergency needs, those essential needs, food, shelter, the basics, those are fairly easy for us to demonstrate our mission. Other folks might have a slightly different challenge in figuring out how they fit. Arts organizations might have to think about how they tell their story differently. Different organizations, I've been having some conversations with an organization here in Michigan and another part of the state, and they work with Child Protective Services. They can't do a lot of their work right now, but they also know from the research that we're seeing their work is going to be essential in the coming months. And so how do they readjust to that? So this is where you all have to be thinking about, what does our story look like right now? What does our story look like in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months? And how do we articulate that to the people that are closest to us? And with that, I'm going to just kind of let you guys ask questions. Let's engage in some conversation. And keep in mind, all of you on this call have wisdom too. You've all had different experiences. You've all had different challenges in the midst of this for the past, some of us have been at home for 3 weeks, some 4. I'm on week 6. So we've all had different experiences. So I would love to hear what your questions are, and we can do some problem solving together, my hope is. Oh, don't be shy.
Any ideas for virtual fundraising, Tamela?
So yeah, this is a really interesting thing that everybody's trying to tackle right now. Show of hands, like let's just be old-fashioned hands. Has anybody done virtual fundraising before? A couple people. So there's lots of different platforms to use, right? When we think of virtual fundraising, many of us think of a GoFundMe or a platform like that, or online fundraising through Facebook or some of those types of things. There's a lot of different ways to think about. What I'm seeing, which I find fascinating, is people are doing virtual events using Zoom. I actually serve on a board where we're looking at moving our entire conference this fall online. Never done it before, have no idea how it will work, but we're going to try. So it is an option. I've actually seen organizations doing virtual balls where they have a time just to gather. If you have depending on the Zoom account that you have available, there's an option to put people in little rooms, and you can actually construct Zoom cocktail parties where you say, okay, you're going to be mixed with this group for a few moments, and then you're going to be mixed into a different group. And so you can do all of these different types of features on Zoom, which is a way to think about how do we gather people together to share stories and to share the story of our organization. So that's one way to think about it. There's also sort of the non-event event that has been around for a while, not widely used, that I'm seeing some organizations transition to. Stay in your pajamas and join us for the party, so to speak. And so you can be creative in that way. Again, it has to fit the culture of your organization and really focus on how it fits your mission, would be my 2 cents.
Tamela, how can we as leaders manage our own fears, panic during this season when we are canceling our own fundraisers?
That's a real issue right now. And if you have staff, you're also trying to manage the staff's fears and panic, right? So I think the key is we have to take time to settle the ball. And I confess, I heard this term from Brene Brown, and I have adopted it because I just love it. It makes so much sense to me. So if anybody's ever played soccer, when you think about soccer, one of the things that soccer players are taught to do is settle the ball. So when that ball comes at you, it can hit you anywhere. You want to let it drop, get your foot on it, and really think for a second, what's my next move? And I think that's important for us to do right now. We've had a tendency, and this is normal tendency, we've had a tendency to have sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the next thing that's happening. We do that a lot in nonprofits. Let's be honest, right? That's kind of how we operate on a daily basis. It's been highlighted during this crisis. So take a second and just say, okay, what's going on around us? Where are we at? Do some financial analysis. Think about what your revenue looks like. Look at your history. Start talking to those donors that are closest to you. Settle the ball and then make the next decision. And here's the important thing about the emotions: acknowledge them. Like, it's okay to say, you know what? I'm frustrated. I'm freaked out. I posted a picture last night on my Facebook page that had literally 3 pounds of candy that I had purchased yesterday. And I said, this is indicative of my mood today, because that's what I do when I'm stressed. And I said on my Facebook page, I said, I don't want any hater comments, because you know what? I just need people to be nice to me right now. And so it was acknowledging that, yeah, I'm very fortunate that I can continue to work from home when millions of people are not able to work right now. And I acknowledge that, but that doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean this is okay, right? And I think it's important to just have that open, honest conversation internally as an organization, with your staff, with your board. Have that conversation with your board. Many of them are probably still feeling the same way. And have that conversation with those who are closest to your organization. It's okay to be vulnerable right now. And I think it's important to be vulnerable right now, because that also gives our donors permission to be vulnerable with us, and that builds a deeper relationship.
How honest and transparent should we be? I'm afraid my donors will think I'm a poor money manager if I tell them how badly we need operational support.
I think it's how you tell the story that matters. This is where having those conversations with people closest to us matters, because we can say to a close donor, we can say to a close friend, right? That's what they should be, I hope, that here's the reality. If we want to make sure that our organization is still here when we re-enter and we begin to recover, we have to cover basic costs right now. I mean, everybody knows that. That's what this whole Federal CARES Act was about. That's what the whole PPP program was about. We all sort of know that. That doesn't make you a bad money manager. It's just a situation that we're in. And it is okay to be honest with your donors about that, but talk about the things that you do to manage your finances well. Talk about the things that you do on a normal basis and why this particular situation makes it harder to do those things. People will understand that. And again, be very careful who you have that conversation with. Who's closest to you? Some donors you're not going to be able to have that conversation with, and that's okay. I mean, we segment our communications to our donors all the time, right? On a normal day, we do that. This isn't any different. So how we might communicate with those closest to us might look a little different than those that are a little bit more at arm's length. And that's okay. I think if you know sort of where your relationship is at with people, you will know how deeply you can step into that. But I really encourage people right now, be transparent. Most of our donors are savvy. They understand that we're in a really, I know everybody's using the term unprecedented, but there's really no other term for it. We're in this very unprecedented time. And people know that. And they're not going to look at you and say, well, why weren't you better prepared? Well, there's a million different reasons for that, right? Not all of us have 3 months of cash reserves or 6 months of cash reserves. That's just the reality of being a nonprofit and doing our best to serve our communities. So I think it's how you position the conversation that's going to make the difference. Show your history of how well you've managed your finances, but be honest about where you're at.
Do you have any ideas about handling a second wave of infection?
Mm-hmm.
I think many are pushing events and asks back to late summer and fall.
You know, that's a hard question. A lot of organizations that I'm working with, in boards that I'm on myself, we're just not bothering with events this year. I mean, we're a traditional in-person event. We've decided just to move everything virtually. Even at the Johnson Center, we're not 100% certain that we're going to schedule in-person meetings for the rest of the year. We're still trying to navigate that and figure that out because nobody knows what's going to happen. So I think you always have to plan with the contingency in mind. And you have to be very thoughtful. If you're going to push events, here's the question you have to ask yourself. Are we going to be able to find sponsors? Are people going to want to commit to come to an event in October when there's so much uncertainty about what's going to happen? Chances are probably not. So do you want to lay out a lot of money to get a location, sign a contract for different pieces of that event, and put yourself at that financial risk? These are conversations that I would hope you are having in your boardrooms, virtual boardrooms now. I hope that you're engaging your board in those conversations. I hope that you're engaging, if you have fund development committees or marketing committees as part of your board, that you're engaging those folks in these conversations. But you have to kind of back it up and say, what's the viability of us being able to get sponsors? What's the viability of people feeling comfortable to RSVP to an event in October when we're still not 100% certain what's going to happen? And how much time frame do I have to do an event? Can I wait to make a decision until August if my event's in October? Probably not, depending on the size of the event. So this is where you have to be doing that contingency planning and saying, what can we do instead? And there are some really interesting examples out there of people creating new partnerships. Look around at other nonprofits in your community and say, who can we partner with? Who can we connect with? How might we do some of this together? And don't be afraid to do fundraising together. Be creative.
How can we better support other organizations during this time and clearly understands the needs of the other organizations in the community?
I think that's one way where you have this huge benefit of the Elkhart Foundation, right? Is you get together. I mean, the foundation is convening all of you. You're on these calls each week. You have ways to connect to each other. I'm assuming you have contact information for each other. Start talking to people who are A, serving the same population, B, maybe doing similar work. Like if you're a program that provides food, are there other feeding programs in the community that you can have conversations with? We have to take it upon ourselves right now to just start those conversations and maybe create a space for that. If you have, if somebody has a Zoom account, create a space and say, anybody who's doing housing, hey, we want to get together on this Thursday or whatever the case may be. Join us online. Let's talk about what are the unique challenges that we're facing around housing. How might we work together to do that? I think one of the things we're going to find, the reports that I'm seeing is they're estimating we will lose approximately 25% of all nonprofits across the country. So we're going to shrink. I mean, that's I think a given. So the question is, how do we manage that shrinking? From the standpoint of making sure that within our community, we're not losing vital services, to be thoughtful about staffing, right? People losing jobs, but also to take control as an organization and have some real, honest, serious conversations in your boardroom. And if you start doing some scenario planning 3 months, 6 months, 12 months out, and you go, I'm not sure we're viable. Be honest about that. Maybe bring the foundation into that conversation and say, help us connect to other folks that are doing this work. How might we manage some sort of a collaboration that may or may not lead to a merger, but could for a time help you share some back office functions, could for a time help you share some resources, so you can determine whether or not that's going to help you both be more viable in the long run, or we have to be more thoughtful about building a collaborative effort and potentially a merger. Because here's the thing, and I think this is always the hardest question for nonprofit organizations. And it sounds almost heartless to say this, and I don't mean it to, but we have to get really honest. Are we mission building or are we institution building? And we have to be super honest about that right now. Because if we truly care about the mission, it's people in our community being served. Our institutions have to take a back seat to that right now. And that's hard. That's really hard. But I think we're all in a situation where we have to have that honest conversation.
What advice do you have for a newer gift officer to an organization and how they might relate to donors in this time where there isn't a prior established relationship?
I think right now people are feeling stressed, scared, sometimes lonely. So just reaching out to people, whether you have that prior relationship or not, and saying, hey, I'm calling, from this organization, we care. We just want to know how you're doing. This isn't about necessarily calling and asking for something. Saying, how are you doing? That will give you that entree, that will give you that permission to build that relationship, and then stay in touch and listen really, really well. Because if you start asking, how are you doing? Chances are, human nature, what are they going to start asking you? How are you doing? And this is where you can build that bridge to here's what's going on in our organization. It's not a hard sell. It's just here's what's happening. Here's where we're at. And listen to where those cues are to be able to invite them in deeper.
My inbox and voicemail are jam-packed with messages from every company I've ever associated with. How much is too much communication that will get lost in this waterfall? And what is the best message to break through the backlog and get read?
That's an interesting question because my reaction is in a crisis, it's important to over communicate. I do firmly believe that when you're thinking about communicating with volunteers, staff, board, donors, the community at large. I think in crisis, it's important to quote unquote over communicate. But be careful and thoughtful about what you're communicating. So it's not, you don't want to just be another noise out there in the system. And be careful and thoughtful about the tools that you're using to communicate. This is where engaging your board and say, we're going to split up the roster. Everybody's going to call 10 donors this next week. And we're just going to check in on people. And you, just like we normally would, right? You give them maybe 3 or 4 key things. Make sure that we understand this is how we're talking about the crisis. This is how we're talking about how we fit into this situation right now, how our mission connects. And then even when you're using social media, if you're using e-newsletters, it's not so much about how often you're communicating, it's more about what's the message that you're communicating. And I think that's where we have to get super, super clear on our own missions. It amazes me how many nonprofits I work with that aren't able to articulate their mission well on a good day, much less in the middle of this entire crisis. So have those strategic conversations. How do we fit? Why does this mission, and again, mission focused, not institution focused, why does this mission matter right now? Why does this mission matter as we re-enter? Why does this mission matter when our community begins to recover? Those are 3 slightly different stories, and you need to know what each of those stories are. And you need to be able to tell each of those stories. You get your story down, and then you begin to strategize. What are the platforms that we have available to us? Don't worry about going out and inventing new platforms or getting new platforms right now, because that's hard. Other than I know many of you have learned how to use Zoom and gotten Zoom. I mean, it's a necessary mode of communication. And maybe that's one thing you could do. Maybe you invite your donors to coffee, just like the foundation has invited all of you to coffee, and say, we're going to be online on Zoom. Here's the link. Come join us. We just want to see your face, make sure you're okay, and let you know what's going on. It's an easy way to connect. You might say, well, gosh, a lot of our donors might not have internet access. Okay, then we're going to do a calling tree. We're going to get people on the phone. We're going to do it in a sort of a campaign way, right? We're going to do this all in the next 3 days. You're going to get the message out there. So part of it depends on your own capacity as an organization. But I would say the key to figuring out communication is really knowing what those 3 stories are. How do we fit now? How do we fit at reentry? How do we fit when we begin to recover? And your job is to be able to articulate that. Here's how we fit now. Here's the vision we're casting. Let's plant some seeds for what it's going to look like in the future. And then at some point, as we begin recovery, here's what we need you to do to mobilize action so that we can recover. Does that make sense?
Tamela, we greatly appreciate you joining us today and your inspiring thoughts on how they can get creative in fundraising. If anybody else has any quick last questions, we're coming up on 10:30, so we want to be conscious of everybody's time. I think I've got everybody squared away, so.
I thought you'd have a lot more questions for me, guys.
Well, we'll go ahead and tie it out. Again, Tamela, thank you so much. For everybody, keep us in mind on Thursday. We'll be having a conversation with Pete McCown, the president at the foundation. So we hope we'll have you on our call then, 2 o'clock on Thursday. Appreciate all you guys. Be safe, have fun, enjoy the sunshine while we have it and the warm weather. Thanks so much, guys.
Take care.